Yeah, and we are live. I was just complimenting Peter's t-shirt.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've left the school, but I have yet to leave the credentialism behind. So,
you wrote the Substack piece, but you're still wearing the shirt.
yeah, that's how it goes. Everyone has their toxic ex significant other.
A toxic achievement zombie.
Yeah.
Uh, um, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm sure people are going to be joining. Just want to welcome those who are joining us, Susan, Andrew, and some others coming on in. We wanted to have this conversation. Peter and I have been trying to make an argument that autonomous technology is essential to American renewal. And it's a tough argument to make. And I think everybody's thinking about these issues right now. And initially, we were rushing it, and we wanted to just take this time to hash it out with each other and do it openly so that you guys can hear our conversation. So that's a little bit about the context of the discussion today. Peter, maybe you can share about the context of our collaboration.
Yeah, so me and Jeff have been trying to do something new, something a little bit exciting. The context is that I was recently hired by the Boyd Institute as part of this like kind of 3 month sprint where we're going to be trying to figure out kind of a redirection of everything, and the big push is really to try to bring y'all along in the journey, as we're going to be doing covering various topics for 3 month sprints and just having these kind of open conversations. So this is the one of the first efforts in that attempt to kind of like open up the process, open up the black box a little bit. And so it's just that's kind of the high level context. I will say I'm excited. I've been wanting to do one of these Substack Live conversations for a while, and I think this is a good way to lose my Substack Live virginity. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm not going to build on that metaphor, although it's tempting. But yeah, Peter and I actually connected through Substack. I was an admirer of his writing for a while, and then he DM'd me, and then I was like, I kind of rebuffed him at the time, but but we ended up. I just admired his work, and then he at one point reached out about the Boyd Institute, and then pitched me on joining us for a 3 month collaboration as he figures out what's next for him. And we jumped at the opportunity. The Boyd Institute's a think tank that I set up about 2 years ago. It's kind of a sandbox exercise where we wanted to create space for creative solutions to problems facing America and globally. And initially, the idea was to bring design thinking to strategic issues and just get us starting to think about real substantial policy issues as opposed to getting caught up in a lot of culture war stuff. And the model that we've been working off of informally, but now that Peter's joining, he's really accelerating and taking it to the next level, is quarterly policy sprints, where every quarter we dive into a different policy issue, a different strategic issue, and we kind of come into it as like newbies and learn all about it, and then network with insiders, and then invite a sense of play and outside the box thinking, and then come out the other end of it with some bold asymmetric creative solutions. And sometimes those things will stick and sometimes not, but we're not afraid to point to bold solutions. And that's the story with this autonomy sprint that we're on right now. We started this sprint focused on drones and autonomy, and the initial problem statement was, if drones are the future of warfare and America doesn't control our drone supply chain, like, what does that mean? And so we assembled a group of insiders from the government, from drone and autonomy companies. We organized a dinner, and like this process goes so many times, what we realized is that yes, the supply chain issues are really important, but the bigger picture is accelerating autonomy overall, and that autonomous technology and drones are kind of like where computers and PCs were in the 70s, like in the garage, and that if we could just overall accelerate the American market for autonomy and for drone productions, that will set the stage for resolving some of these supply chains and conserve the country in general. So we've gone down this path of promoting autonomy and autonomous systems. We promoted this idea called the American Autonomy Initiative, which was a way of building off of Trump's AI strategy you guys may have seen a couple weeks ago. And I don't know about you, Peter, but like we've written a number of articles. Peter's written some good ones on autonomy. And we, while I'm not cheerleader in the Mark Andreessen sense, like let's just accelerate for the sake of it, increasingly I have conviction that we need to be embracing autonomous technology and that there are a lot of benefits for it, creating new jobs. Like it's decent, in regions like drone firefighting, like in red states, you can create new trade jobs, productivity. um, there are all these reasons I think to support autonomy. There are risks as well. Um, so that's a little bit of background. And here we're going to talk about probably the most important article that we're working
Yeah.
on it, which is autonomy is the way out of America's managed decline. And Peter, maybe you could share a little bit of the story of the article and where we are with it.
Yeah, so I think at a high level, me and Jeff agree that kind of with this like kind of I guess you could describe it as like techno pragmatism perspective, where there's both problems that have to be solved, that technology is essential as a key to the solution, but then there are also these like important social and economic costs that can't be ignored, and that it's and the kind of where the Boyd Institute wants to exist is trying to thread the needle between these things. And Jeff had mentioned that I think, and I would agree, the most important article as part of this autonomy initiative is the way that autonomous systems can potentially serve as a solution to many of America's like most pressing problems, right? So the way that we both kind of came into this at was that the math of American political economy just doesn't make sense anymore, right? It was predicated, all of our things from entitlement programs to infrastructure spending to just everything was predicated on kind of an assumption of demographic growth, high levels of productivity growth, just these variables that are probably, at least for the last 30 years, have no longer been true. And so, we as America, we're kind of presented with one of like three options. The first is just managed decline, right? Like just decide that we're just going to crash the ship into the iceberg ahead of us, and we're just going to, like, I don't know, eat as much of the caviar as we can before the ship goes down. Then there's kind of the more you could describe as the zero sum perspective, which just assumes that we're going to live in a world of low demographic growth, low productivity growth, and try to rebalance for more of like a Malthusian world of zero sum. And then there's the third perspective that we think is probably the right one, which is try to think about how do we boost productivity growth such that we actually don't have to live in a world of managed decline, right? Like we can live in a world that this American dream that everyone can be better off than their parents is could still exist and could still be promised for myself, for Jeff, for our future children, right? We could all have a retirement. But I think as we tried to like write up this autonomy article, which was a little bit more just like brouhaha, this is great. At least I think me and Jeff both ran into that. There are like some serious counter arguments to just like unleash autonomy across the entire economy, right? And we need to like hash out maybe where that techno pragmatism really comes in, right? How do we balance the Mark Andreessen accelerationist approach with maybe more of like the Bidenist era, techno safetyist approach? And I don't think we quite had that balance. So I think that gives a little bit of context to the background. Is there anything you want to add, Jeff?
Yeah, and I think the goal, and that was really helpful, completely on the same page. I mean, I think the goal is really think through this article, like rather than just cranking out an article about how autonomy is the way out of America's decline and how it's the key to resolving some of these structural issues with our political economy. We really wanted to think through the argument and make sure it's a sound argument, and that we're not just cranking it out. And so we wanted to create the, and I don't, Peter and I have different perspectives. I think we generally agree directionally, but on some of the specifics, we may share different perspectives. And so we wanted to create this space just to hash it out and go through the argument and strengthen the argument and also get your guys' feedback because you guys may bring up issues that we haven't even thought about. But before we do that, I mean, I saw some smart people on here like Stetson and Pedro and William and some others. um, I think part of what we're trying to do at the Boyd Institute is like go above the partisan fray, and like we talk about like substantively America First issues. Like we're not a partisan organization. We're not trying to be partisan. We're not trying to be populist. We're trying to like go above the fray and solve meaningful, substantial policy issues that materially affect the future, especially of young Americans, and our others in friendly nations too. And so that's kind of where we're coming from, is to try to solve these real problems as grown-ups in the room, and at the same time create space for play and creativity and bold ideas, sometimes spicy ideas, not just for the sake of it though, but to actually solve the problem. And we're finding is that like culture war gets all the clicks, but solving these meaningful problems is really more important. And often they'll orthogonally touch on some of the culture war issues. So that's just a little bit of a context on I think why you guys should follow the Boyd Institute and the work that we're doing, and also I think some of what Peter is catalyzing in us and helping us realize is that like these younger LFG Americans are like people want outlets to be able to engage in meaningful policy issues, not just culture war stuff. We're not saying don't do culture war. If you want to do that, fine. But we just want to create a space where people can sink their teeth into meaningful issues in a deeper way that's also bipartisan. Um,
And if I can just
without,
append to
yeah,
this, because
go ahead.
I think that this is an important topic to talk about. I think one of I recently wrote an article about like what happened to youth culture on my Substack. If you guys want to check it out, and the gist of the article is that I think that there are a lot of just changes that have happened that are the cause of kind of like diffuse things, and it's very easy to just not to think that like nothing can get changed, nothing can get proved, everything is just like is fucked for lack of another way of saying it, right? And so I'm just going to be a chud in the corner and complain, or to maybe just pretend that everything's perfect, there's no downsides to accelerating. And I guess we're trying to think what I think me and Jeff are coming at this at when we're on the same page is like how do we open a space for people like you guys, right? Like people who are interested in solving the problems. To be a part of the conversation. So anyway, I think that's we're on the same page. So just to reiterate what Jeff had said, I saw a message here from William. Can either of you envision a world where there's some sort of nationalization of the gains from all productivity, and those gains are redistributed as a form of UBI? If you want to chime in on this first, Jeff, I can also share my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I'd like to do is go through our argument
Sure.
and then
Yeah.
counter arguments, and I think that's a. I'm glad you pulled that out because that's there is a real counter argument that hey, if we double down on AI and autonomy, all the gains of wealth are going to go to very few people. And I think that's a really good argument, and that we really need to have a conversation about our social contract and safety nets and so forth, and how we spread the benefits of these technologies if we double down on them. So I think that's a really good point. And yeah, what I'd like to do is just kind of go through. Peter, I'm going to go through our latest
Sure.
draft.
Yeah.
Um, we had some draft drama, and I
That's how it
caused
goes.
it. I caused it, but we realized like we just need space to talk it through. So I'm going to talk through my latest draft and kind of give you the structure of the argument, Peter, and pick apart where I mean, some of this builds off of your drafts, but pick it apart. So I would say that um, so Peter kind of nicely set the stage. Like basically, America's political economy was built for a younger, faster growing nation with rising productivity. That foundation is kind of crumbling. Birth rates are falling. Population's aging. Productivity growth is kind of meh. We have these entitlements and stuff like that. And basically, what we're the core thesis of our argument is that one of the most powerful levers we have to address these structural issues is autonomous technology. Like we kind of had this light bulb moment. Peter and I were like, "Whoa, autonomous technology! Like we don't want to oversell it, but it is one of the keys we think to addressing these structural issues within American political economy. It's still a bet, it's not a guarantee, but we think it's a good bet. And here are the three reasons why. Argument number one. Well, actually, before I do that, Peter, do you agree with that thesis statement, or is there a different way?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. And just to make it clear, if you guys have not been following along in the Boyd, what we mean by autonomous systems is kind of like trying to expand the way that the Trump administration thinks about AI to including the way I described it in one of my previous articles is like AI for the world of atoms, right? So not just like deploying LLMs, but having like robots in hospital care, and stuff like that. And just to reiterate, the idea is right. If you have a shrinking population, these physically instantiated autonomous systems can just help augment human labor. And I think I totally agree that it's one of the possible three solutions, like I had mentioned earlier on this call, to the core political economy math problem.
Cool. Okay, so we're on the same page about the thesis. One of the most powerful levers. We're not saying the most powerful lever anymore. We're saying one of the most um, is autonomous technology. Okay, argument number one. So what we're going to do is we're going to do thesis statement, three arguments, then counter arguments, and then conclusion. So argument number one is one way autonomy can help is by cushioning the impact of demographic change. Fewer workers are supporting more retirees, et cetera, et cetera. Immigration can help, but only so much. Basically, one big argument for autonomy is that it's a force multiplier for the productivity of the American worker. Um, and that therefore that can help us address the demographic aging population challenge. It's part of the solution to that. Do you agree with that, Peter, or is there a different way you would?
Yeah, I think I agree. And as I've been, reflecting on it more, I think the way there's kind of like the argument in favor, and then I'm gonna think about like maybe the caveats that I have around it. The argument in favor, I think, is well phrased, that is just kind of essential to replace aging. One of the things that has been striking me more and more is, the way that this impacts different parts of the population and different parts of the distribution. You can think of it as like, maybe it's very beneficial to older people to have the autonomous systems in their hospital, but there are people I personally know who, for example, got registered nurse degrees. Like, what do we do with them, right? And I know I'm preempting a little bit of like the counter argument at the end, but we just need to be very cognizant of like it's something can be good on net and good for parts of the population, but also catastrophically bad for people who may be invested in degrees that are no longer valuable.
Yeah, Peter, it's wild. You've gone from total cheerleader to
All
steel
over the
manning
place.
to
This
counter
is how it goes,
argument
right?
effective. No, it's great. It means we're engaging with it. We'll get to the Chipotle art counter
Yeah.
argument later. I don't know if you guys saw that New York Times article. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so that was argument one. I think that's pretty straightforward. Point number one. Okay, point number two is that autonomy can also restore America's industrial leadership. I think part of the argument here is that it kind of leapfrogs the labor-driven manufacturing model. We're competing with China, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at like Amazon as a case study, Amazon, there was an article in the New York Times, a couple months ago about how it's increased the number of packages shipped per warehouse employee by like 22-fold,
Crazy.
and
Like,
which is crazy. And it has like these. I created this GIF of one of its warehouses with like the tractors, like autonomous things moving around. It's kind of cool. And at the same time, I mean, Amazon, because of its growth, has also created net more jobs. So Amazon is an example where we've seen those productivity increases. We've seen how autonomy can help revitalize American and industrial model. And then Tesla was another example there. Um, yeah, I think you guys get the picture. We might be able to strengthen the examples there, but
and I think
Peter,
this is
anything
one that I'm
anything to say?
still hardcore bullish on. Like, I think in terms
Okay.
of manufacturing, this is an environment where I personally, and I'm actually interested in the chat to see if there are disagreements, that I think that autonomy is the only way that we can keep labor income high, right? And keep manufacturing productivity high. And because it's really vital, rebuilding an industry that's kind of been hollowed out, there's, to me, maybe I have less concerns about these like distributional effects. So this is one where I would still argue upon thinking, and I think I'm still like hardcore bullish on, but I'm interested
Yeah.
in your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, with me, it's like I get like this is one where I like buy the argument autonomy can restore America's industrial leadership, but I don't know that for me, I believe that, but I don't know that I've made that argument convincingly enough.
Yeah.
So I think like the examples and prove how would autonomy, I mean, maybe it's not, and maybe it's kind of BS saying that we're ever going to lead industrially too, because China just has so much more capacity. But I think it can revitalize American industry in that by investing in autonomous systems, we can make our labor economics make sense and get back in the game of actually producing things in America. So
But
maybe
it will
maybe that's
also
how it should be.
maybe require thinking about manufacturing from a different perspective from how our political economy has previously. I think previous conversations in our political economy have primarily been about manufacturing labor, right? Like about how do we get quote unquote manufacturing jobs back to the United States? And personally, I think that in terms of building things at home, that's maybe the wrong way to think about it. And really the big arguments for building things at home are kind of like a national security. It's worth having these supply chains close to our base, and that maybe the manufacturing jobs are really hard. One Christmas I worked at a factory, and it was one of the most hellish experiences of my life. And So I think we just this is maybe something we need to refine in the argument, but that just increasing output, even if that doesn't necessarily come with increased um, employment statistics, I think is on its own very useful.
So, is working with the Boyd Institute better than factory work?
100%. Yeah, it's close. It's like I wouldn't go so far as to say it's much better, but
Oh, wow. Okay. Ouch. No, I'm teasing.
I'm just joking. This is
So no, no. So I think that argument we buy that autonomy can, I would say, revitalize America's industrial, I don't know, leadership, but we can help revitalize American industry. I think we can improve the examples there. But that's basically the second main
yeah,
point that we had. And then the third main point, I think this is the one that's the where we can improve it the most, in my opinion. We said a third payoff is rebuilding trust in institutions by basically improving government, using autonomy to improve government services like the DMV, automating the DMV or whatever. And Peter, in an earlier draft, I think you would frame that as state capacity, which I actually like
yeah.
better than rebuilding trust in institutions. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that third point? How would you strengthen it?
I think I guess we need to just more clearly think through specific examples of how autonomy can give stuff, right? So it's like in the drafts that we've worked on previously, I think, and this is myself on the first draft I sent you. I just listed out some ideas, right? It's like, oh, we could have an autonomous DMV, or we could have drones like automatically checking the quality of infrastructure. But I think more carefully thinking through maybe what are the actual like shortfalls in American state capacity, right? And would autonomy actually address those shortfalls? Is something that I feel like I agree that that's a space that
It's
requires work.
it's a little awkward to talk about, but yeah, like I think it can expand state capacity and maybe make interactions with things smoother in certain
Yeah,
ways. Like, I mean, I guess the way I think about it, and I'm older than this is like a Gen X Zoomer collaboration here. But like before ATMs, you had to like go into the bank and withdraw money from a bank teller. And ATMs came around and people freaked out because they thought, oh my gosh, it's going to take banking jobs. And it actually didn't. I mean, it automated like cash withdrawals and stuff, as we all know. But it actually, what happened is rather than it did take banking jobs, but it also ended up in replicating more bank locations. So in balance, even though it cut the number of jobs per bank, it increased the number of like bank locations. So like just like ATMs improved the experience of withdrawing cash. I think there are all kinds of ways that even beyond government, autonomy can just smooth our interactions with things. I mean, we were joking, like, would you rather order, like at McDonald's? I was talking to people, like, would you rather order from the machine, the McDonald's, like the kiosk, or from a person? And maybe it depends on that person, their attitude, and so forth. But like, I don't know. But there are all these different interactions, or going to the DMV or stuff. I don't, I don't, with autonomy, the idea is like we could both expand state capacity and maybe improve the overall experience of interacting with things. So I would say that third point, I don't know how I would articulate it at this point.
yeah. I think I
I'm
think
struggling with this
underlying
one.
I think underlying all of the points we've talked about is kind of this variable of like how much you time discount the future, right? Like that I feel like I feel like most people could probably agree that if there's something that could be done more effectively and you implement autonomous systems, maybe in the long run, in 30, 40, 70 years, it's just better, right? But you gave the example of bank tellers. I think this is something from a public policy perspective we should think about more clearly is just discounting, right? Like is like there's maybe some positive outcome in the future. And so but how we think about balancing that against now is something I just need when we get off this call. I need to think about more clearly.
Yeah. So that third argument to reinforce our thesis is one that, I mean, there's something there, but I don't know exactly how to articulate it
Yeah.
right now. So we're still thinking through that, or at least I am. Anything else on that, Peter, before we
Nope.
jump into counter arguments? Okay, so we shared our thesis, which was one of the most powerful levers we have to address American political economy structural issues is through autonomous technology. We just shared like our three arguments for that, which are obviously we're still working on. And now we want to go through some of the counter arguments and then the refutations of those counter arguments that we've identified. So one counter argument is that automation will destroy American jobs, which will cause pain. You guys saw you may have seen the article, I think it was yesterday or the day before in the New York Times about how computer science majors aren't getting jobs anymore. Like they've gone from getting these six-figure offers to, there was a quote of a woman who was like, "I got a better offer from Chipotle." Um, Actually, it's not really funny, but I guess the Chipotle thing was funny. So the argument is that it will destroy American jobs, if not disrupt them. And uh, and the my response to that is this is true in the short run. Like it is going to disrupt the labor market, just kind of like the internet did. But history tells that if it's like all of these other technologies that improve productivity, that there will be massive labor displacement, but that there will be more opportunities created than taken away. So think about farm mechanization. In 1900, 40% of the American population worked in agriculture. By the end of the century, like 2% of the American population did. That doesn't mean those 38% of people were like out of a job. Their labor was allocated to higher and better uses. And I think my assumption is that will happen with autonomy. Now, some might say, well, it's becoming so smart that this time might be different. But I think that's an uphill argument to make. And the other point I would add is that, or 2 points I would add is that one, new jobs are going to be created around autonomy. So, like, we did a jobs, I think I wrote a jobs piece. So think about firefighters in the West, forest fires. Like, why are we like those are going to be fought with drones?
Yeah.
They're, self-driving cars. Yes, taxi drivers, Uber drivers, bus drivers might lose their jobs, but we're going to need people to maintain those cars still. So there are going to be new types of jobs created around autonomy. Maybe they don't match up, one to one, but that's what's happened with the internet, for example. Like your retail store may have gone out of business, which totally sucks, but created other jobs, elsewhere.
And there's some
I think,
amount of
yeah, go
just
ahead.
fundamentally faith that you have to have in the future, right? There's always in all of these things like some amount of leap of faith. And I think this is where I keep coming back personally to the main counter argument to this is that, like, yes, jobs will be lost, but I really just genuinely do believe, based on my interactions with AI personally, based on like the research we've done into autonomy, that a lot of the jobs that are going to be replaced are like the jobs that I personally would want to work least in the world, right? And that like I don't want to be a cashier, I don't want to be doing a lot of these things, and I guess maybe that's not like a substantive counter argument, but it is core to the way I think both of us are thinking about this, right? That
It,
there's a
Sidebar, yeah, I have a draft essay on like why we should lean into the future
yeah.
and how that leap of faith is. It's almost like having kids. Like there's a level of optimism of like leaning in forward into the future and embracing technologies, even though they're sometimes disruptive and scary. And I don't mean blindly and being dumb about it, but I think that's a really deep and important point that you mentioned, Peter. Just one final response to the counter argument about automation destroying jobs is I think there's a bigger danger of insolvency. What
Yeah.
happens if we don't embrace automation? We don't become more productive. Other countries get ahead of us. And then, like, how are we going to solve entitlement spending and all these things? Like, that's going to really suck. So I would say, like,
And that's
temporary.
central to
Yeah, go ahead.
all of the counter argument things, right? Is that the when in economics you always think of it as like the next best option. That's the way you should always think about everything, right? And for as an American, when you look at just the math on something like Social Security, our like I mentioned at the start of this call, our options are truly insolvency, severe cuts, or something else, right? Like some way to grow ourselves out of this problem. And so when we're thinking about risks to the job market, when we're thinking about any of these other risks, like kind of like Jeff said, you need to keep in mind maybe the outside option, which in my mind is like maybe just ramming the Titanic into the iceberg, right? And like that's important, right? Like we're not just coming at this from a perspective of unlimited choice. And so I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, that's key point in framing. All right. Well, let's go to the second counter argument. I referenced earlier that the gains from autonomy will accrue to capital owners and highly skilled workers, widening the wealth gap. In other words, Sam Altman might get super rich, but what about the rest of us? And I think that risk is real. We do see autonomy concentrating wealth among the few, and that has social and political consequences. So we want to acknowledge that. And at the same time, like, I think that it's important, like, we're not just saying, let's just embrace autonomy. Like, I think at the same time, there's a conversation to have about how to spread its benefits. Worker equity stakes, like tax incentives tied to wage growth, portable benefits like training and education. I think just like the Industrial Revolution created a conversation about how we update the American social contract, I think autonomy should be paired with that kind of conversation as well. Do you agree, Peter? Anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I agree, right? And this there's like the meme that I love, which is like inside of you there are two wolves, and this is true for myself. Like inside of me, there's wolf A that kind of thinks like maybe in like a more like libertarian brain context that we should just allocate resources efficiently, and maybe this like unfairly accumulates to capital holders. But if they're producing an outsized share of like the productivity gains, then it seems reasonable for them to accumulate enormous amounts of wealth, right? So, for example, Elon Musk is extremely rich. I have a Tesla. I love the Tesla. It seems extremely reasonable to me that he's gained this wealth. But also, there's like a limit form of this argument where meta engineers are making like $1 billion, and there's this girl who graduated with a computer science degree who has no alternative, right? And I don't want to live in a country where maybe 5,000 people own all of the wealth and everyone else is serfs. So I don't have like from a policy making perspective, I don't have like real solutions to this because I don't want to destroy the incentive structure that exists that encourages people. But it is like a deeply held belief of mine that low types, right, like low human capital people who are not necessarily the highest, most educated, most productive people in the world should be allowed to have like a dignified, uh, stable life that's good. It is a genuine fear of mine that AI might make it such that only extremely high types, extremely agentic people succeed at all, right? And it just eats the middle, and there's nothing left. And so I'm interested to hear, Jeff, if you have any what you do, or if you have any impulses on like what you do from a
Yeah.
policy making perspective.
Well, I think it's a conversation, not an answer, like you said. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of ironic. Like the road to serfdom is like, a pro capitalism thing, and there is a road to serfdom that comes through embracing technology without even talking about these issues that I think we should be mindful of. I think a lot of people, the tendency is to leap towards solutions like UBI, and I'm kind of that doesn't sit well with me. I think like you said, Peter, there's an underlying incentive structure there. So I think it's a conversation we need to have. Like you, I don't know the right answer, but I think we as a society can probably figure it out together, and that's an ongoing conversation that we should have. And that, whether you're on the if you're on the left, you probably already want to have that conversation. If you're on the right, I definitely think that's something to be a part of, because if we want to preserve like the techno capitalist machine, I think we need to be responsible about it, make sure it's benefiting people. We don't have to go full like John Rawls, but like keeping in mind how we share the prosperity is really key.
One last
Uh,
thing to add to this, which is that in a previous conversation, Jeff had tied it to a very good article by Richard Hanania about high skill immigration. And I actually think that this kind of question is directly connected to that, right? That there's like an important balance that needs to be struck between not falling behind and not misallocating capital, and also that there are just these distortionary effects that need to be balanced. And anyway, I just think that this is a thing that these things are tightly woven in some way, right?
yeah, yeah, and let's come back to the immigration thing because that's super interesting. Actually, well, let's dive into it now because I feel like
So
we
yeah,
covered that counter argument. So let's talk about immigration, and we'll talk about surveillance and robot takeover. Um, so on the immigration point, um, to date, the model of American neoliberalism has been free markets, open borders, right? Like get low skilled immigrants in and get high skilled immigrants too. And we're not anti immigrant by any means, or at least I'm
no.
not. So we're pro immigrant. We realize that immigrants are part of the answer. However, I think that has limitations, and that we need to break this pyramid scheme like model that is so dependent on importing other people. So like a lot of low scale skilled labor stuff, I think automation will change the dynamic of. If robots are picking fruit, like that's going to change the dynamic of that. With high skilled immigration, we still need like the super genius AI programmer that's getting a $500 million offer. Like there's a geopolitical competition for that talent. I think that's really important. The H-1Bs from like factory, random degree mills in India or whatever. Like, I don't know. That's an open conversation we can have. But the point is like, and right now America is at an all-time high of foreign-born population.
Yeah.
So even if you're pro-immigrant, as I think we are sympathetic to, that's part of the equation, but we've reached our capacity on that. And so autonomy, embracing autonomy is a way to make us less dependent on this invade and invite model that I think we've been stuck in for many years.
Yeah, and that comes with serious costs, right? Like I think this goes back to like me and Jeff are both. I would describe myself as generally pro-immigrant, but it is like I think the way we've been thinking about this issue in particular with low wage immigration that I think autonomy really helps solve. For example, in the conversation JD Vance had with the All In podcast, Jason Calcanis was pushing him on deportations, and he really counter argued that autonomy is a mechanism to try to produce increase like low skill labor productivity, so we don't have to be bringing in high levels of immigration in the same way. I think I guess like what I just keep coming back to, and my deep instinct here is that you have to care about like low types in some way, right? Like this is a conversation I think me and Jeff have had a number of times that it's like you need an elite class that really is focused on like the full distribution, and not just bringing in like unlimited people to keep service costs like extremely low or something like that. And so I don't want to get too distracted by the topic of immigration because we're trying to talk about autonomy right now. But anyway, that's kind of my
Yeah,
high level
and we
thoughts.
and we have we just wanted to surface it as an issue, and we
Yeah,
respect that different people have different opinions about how much immigration. Like Hanania, whom I totally respect, he's probably more open borders, and he's like invite in all the high skilled immigrants. I have other friends who are like, let's have a 10-year moratorium on all immigration. I'm probably somewhere in between and pragmatic about it. I think getting some of the high skilled, immigrants and talent is really key. I think the low skilled immigration, I mean, especially with autonomy, that the labor market's going to be in flux right now. But I think the key point is that autonomy shifts the dynamic of this political economy model that we've been in for so many years, and that it's a key to kind of break out of this cycle where it's like, whoa, we have no choice but to like open our borders, and that's a form of emotional and economic blackmail on the American public, and
yeah.
on some level, I mean, that's not, I don't like doing it like with a gun to our head. um, that's just my personal perspective. So we wanted to just flag it as an issue and how autonomy enters this conversation. And I guess it's an example of how these substantial policy issues we're engaging with also touch on some of these cultural issues orthogonally. Um, any
Agreed.
final thoughts on that before we move to the final
No, I mean, I could
counter
gap at it
argument?
forever, but I think
Yeah.
on terms
Okay.
of autonomy, this is good.
Okay. Final counter argument is that autonomy will lead to like this dystopian tech dystopia where robots take over. There's like surveillance, and we forget what it means to be human. Some version of that. The lighter version is that autonomy will like uh, result in a surveillance society. A stronger version might be like, well, these machines are becoming smart. What's going to happen if they go haywire? They create all these risks and so forth. And I think Peter made a really good point in one of our conversations that in the long term, in the long term, this is a really serious conversation of how do we keep humans on top and technology and AI and autonomy on tap. How do we make sure that we're being humanistic and pro-human with these things? That's a really important long-term conversation. In the short term, I think what we're seeing is that it is true that autonomous systems obviously have technical risks. Some of the ones that are dangerous, like AI driven bullets, that's kind of scary, right? Like the defense ones, there are conversations there. But by and large, what we're seeing is that autonomy is resulting in fewer errors rather than more errors. So if you look at self-driving cars, the self-driving cars have proven more safe than human operated systems. In maritime space, a lot of the accidents are human driven. So the safety conversation there, I think there's an argument that autonomous systems are actually safer than human-driven ones. But nonetheless, I still believe that guardrails are important, and that, like the social safety net and social contract, this is a conversation that we need to have around what are appropriate practical guardrails for different autonomous technologies so that humans can stay on top and that we minimize these risks.
And for me, this is like the most important concern, right? I mean, I think that like stuff like inequality, stuff like capital accumulation, there's all these important like short term problems. But to me, like all of those things get solved to some extent in the long run, right? Like like to quote Keynes, we're all dead in the long run. Like maybe there's pandemonium in my life. There was definitely pandemonium during the Industrial Revolution. There was large amounts of change, but it does equalize, things kind of balance out. You develop a new social contract, but that's only possible as long as like living, existent humans are always like still in charge and fundamentally on top. And maybe this is just, we should just acknowledge it, and this is like requires like a whole separate argument. But I do think that this is like, I had like last night, I had like a little bit of like a nightmare of just like, I read Scott Alexander's AI 2027 and just kind of thinking like, okay, like, oh, we're going to solve all these problems. And then like I deploy these systems and suddenly I get turned into like a pet of the AI, because it's not like just ChatGPT that I can turn off. It's, the tractors in the street. It's like the Tesla takes over. And, I don't, I think people tend to think about this from like a little bit of like a doom and gloom pessimistic perspective that isn't always based in rationalism, but it is to me the biggest problem. Like when I just think about, when I think about autonomy, the issue of human agency and just fundamentally human control is an unsolved problem, and I don't feel like we just can't ignore it, right? And I don't, this, for all of these things, like we kind of have like a shape of maybe our impulse for why we think those kind of arguments aren't so important. And the autonomy is still, like me and Jeff agree on this, autonomy is still one of the, if not the best lever for getting American revival back on track. But this one in particular, like I don't want, it's just a nightmare scenario to me. I'm interested, similar, Jeff, if this is like if you think about the tail risk as
Well,
possible
I'm
or not.
I'm glad. I'm actually glad that you're engaging with that argument more, because I was worried, because we don't want to be cheerleaders, right?
Of
Without
course, yeah,
just blind cheerleaders. So I think it's really good just this conversation is so important. It's really good to steel man arguments on all different sides. And I do think there are some long term considerations. Once the AI 2027, I would say, is more on the doomer
for sure.
thing, but that doesn't mean it's not valid and that we shouldn't take it seriously and talk, and like it should be on that. That's a a valid perspective. I guess what it comes down to, just to start to land the plane and conclude
Sure.
our argument on at least the argument we made, is that America has this business model, we call that political economy, that's been built around a certain model since the World War II. And that model is now really under duress, and we're heading towards financial insolvency, especially as boomers retire and fade into the sunset. And so America is heading towards, I think that Peter's term was, it has not much road to drive. And we see autonomy as one possible solution to help address some of these structural issues and improve American productivity, so that we can thread that needle and kind of address and renew American political economy. Because we know, or at least I believe, there's a lot of good that is in American. I know it's sometimes tempted to burn it all down and start fresh, but I believe there's a lot of good in American institutions and what we've built since the post-war, and that a lot of it's worth keeping, but that we definitely need renewal and reform, and that we should aggressively pursue it. And I see autonomy as part of that, picture. So
Yeah,
that's what do you
I
think? How would you land the plane?
I agree. I think the way that I think about this is that like at the end of the day, I go down with the ship, right? This is the kind of, we've talked about this a little bit over the phone, that when you're thinking about these risks that America faces, the fact that we don't have like necessarily too much road, the solving them is not just like an esoteric kind of like online discussion. It's really about like our survival as like a country, as everything. And um and this is where maybe like the two wolves inside of me exist, to rephrase the metaphor that I had used earlier, is like that that I we need to do something, right? And this is where I think me and Jeff are really in agreement that there has to be some solution. And this seems like a very possible one. So I don't know if that lands the plane necessarily, but I think the net is good, and we just need to think about the costs more clearly and how we want to address them.
Yeah, so we wanted to. So now that we've gone through where we are with this essay and our core argument, kind of where we're still thinking through, you can see that we're generally pro autonomy. We think it can play a role in renewing American political economy. We went through some of the counter arguments and how we might think of them. We wanted to just invite you guys to share any thoughts and questions that you have. In the meantime, Peter, I'm just curious, like where are you in this conversation at this point, having talked through? Are there things you're still thinking through, or areas you and I kind of disagree on that are worth unpacking?
But yeah, I just don't know how you address a like extreme tail risk. That's something that is just really bothering me, and I don't know how to think about it. Like I'm really, there are all these short-term disequilibrium effects that I'm worried about, but truly, like my main concern deep in my heart is just this extreme tail risk, that is only possible if you instantiate AI physically, right? As long as it remains purely on the cloud, that tail risk is just is mitigated. But that to me is like 90% of my concern exists there.
Yeah, to build on that. It's kind of like if autonomy is like AI in the internet and all these other technologies, then this is pretty straightforward in my eyes. But
Yeah,
there is this risk that it's like something more, something different.
yeah,
And I think that if I'm understanding you correctly, there's like this nagging sensation that like there is some negative black swan possibility out there that we don't want to like be the guys who like 10 years from now when the robots take over and kill a billion people, they're like, you guys were promoting them.
I don't want to be killed
like
by the AI also, right?
like
Like it's like
no. so, so I do think that black swan tail risk is worth thinking about and does kind of nag at us. And Peter and I both are not blind accelerationists. We are techno realists, techno pragmatists, as he mentioned earlier. Um, and so we think, yeah. So I think that's a really good point, Peter. And that's why I think like we should build that in a little bit. Like maybe hedging isn't the right word, but like maybe humble in our argument, add a little bit of humility, like, hey, look, like we could be all wrong about this. There is this tail risk. So, you know, there is some chance we'll look at that. But that was true with every tech. But then I think we can maybe that's a fourth counter argument.
yeah,
And now that I think about it, because I think that's true with nuclear technology. I mean, Oppenheimer said, "We are death," all this and destruction, and yet it led to peace. So
yeah,
this is where the faith comes in, that we don't always know how technology is going to impact humanity. And often I read this book that kind of blew my mind this summer. I'll forget the name, but like often the same technology that like will start the green revolution with nitrogen is used in Zyklon B in the Holocaust. That's
yeah.
what's really scary about technologies. It can be used for evil as well as good.
So we got a couple of people chiming in here. So the first is Bo. It's lovely to see you, by the way, Bo. He said, as a Booglehead, most of my wealth is tied to the success of the American market. So solving problem is important to me. This is kind of what we're saying. Like I agree. Like I think. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh no, I was just gonna Bo. I knew there was a reason I liked you. I'm a Boglehead as well, with a little bit of a barbell. So I'm a big Boglehead guy myself. That's a Vanguard, the guy who started Vanguard. For those
Okay, thank you.
listening.
I was like, I
Yeah.
don't know what Bogle is.
When you said
Um,
Boggle, I was like, uh oh.
and
It's
then
John Bogle. John Bogle founded this Vanguard, which has really inexpensive like mutual fund stuff, and he's all about index investing versus speculating on stocks.
just like the low fee kind of index
Low
stuff.
fee asset allocation. Bo knows it.
So then a bit off topic. What can an LFG guy do to organize or be organized? This is actually, I think, important. So if it's okay if we just divert a little bit, I'd love to talk about this. So this is really like what Boyd wants to do, and we want feedback from you all on like what the best way to do this is. We're going to be trying to build out maybe some in-person events in the DC area at some point. This is some stuff we've talked about, but really like feedback from you on how you would like to participate in this is essential. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add about how LFG guys can get
Yeah, I
organized.
love that question, Michael. So thank you. I think first, like the history of the LFG actually came from our friend Michael, who's been a friend of the Boyd Institute, and he and I were talking a couple years ago, and he's like, he's in his 30s and has like 4 kids, and he was like, there are all these dads I know in their 30s who are like LFG guys, and I was like, what do you mean? He's like, they just want to go out and solve problems. Like they're talented, they're competent, they like have skin in the game in terms of the future, and they just want to like go do stuff and solve problems competently. And since then, that shorthand of LFG at Let's Freaking Go has stuck because there is a certain psychographic of people of all ages and genders and all that who just want to go solve real problems and not get caught up in the bullshit, but actually meaningfully address American competitiveness and their own countries as well. And so that's our shorthand. At some point, I'd like to write an essay, maybe personally, just fleshing out what it means, like what an LFG American like actually means. But in terms of your question about how to organize LFG Americans, what my worldview and is that there are a lot of you out there, but that it's fragmented and it's very fragmented, and whoever can kind of organize that energy and channel it effectively can really win the future. So I believe there are a lot of really talented people out there who want to solve problems and are just want space to be able to engage in issues. In terms of how to organize them, I don't know. I mean, we're trying our version of that, which is, we're a virtual think tank. We're small, but we're trying to create a space and build an attractor where to attract those LFG Americans where they can kind of step in and engage in certain policy issues in a deeper way than they would be able to just by reading the news. I think we're going to have book discussions and so forth. So a little bit of like Oprah's book club for strategic policy issues, along with creative solutions and so forth. And like Peter said, we may experiment with meetups and different events and so forth. So I think just by participating on this live is one step, and then signing up for the Boyd Institute and following us. We're on Substack, so just go to the Boyd Institute and
You can click
subscribe.
on either of our profiles and it will be there.
Yeah.
One last thing to add is I think people underestimate uh, how much you can just do, right? So for example, like this relationship that I have with Jeff was inspired by like us just talking and just doing it, and kind of like me just pitching things. And so if the question is like, what can I do to get organized? Just do things. And this is like really the core of the LFG spirit is like just go fucking do things, and like maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work, but people tend to underestimate the probability of things working. I think if they just try.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this will get a little spicy. And tell me, so I was joking with this, Michael. We've hosted some dinners and stuff, and I'm like, and I'm a gay guy, right? And I organize the dinners, and then I've started the organization, so fair enough. But at one point, I complained to him. I said, why do straight guys suck at like setting up dinner parties and stuff like that? And I mean, we were just chatting as friends, and I was kind of giving him a hard time and joking, but we were talking yesterday, and we were like about the LFG Americans issue, and we were like, well, it kind of skews male, and how do we avoid it just being all men? And we were where we landed, all like disagreeable straight men, and that's an audience that's out there. I'm not, no shade, but I think one of the things we realized, or we both decided, is like, having all ages and all, women is really key. And oftentimes, not to grossly generalize, but like women are way better organizers than men, often in many cases. And so, gosh, I've worked myself into a little bit of trap here, but I think how to organize LFG Americans means don't just be in your own little
Yeah,
pocket of chuds or whatever. Like, even if it's women, the same thing. Like, we need the different energies that come from different generations, different genders, and so forth to help organize and solve these problems. Does that
agreed.
make sense? Did I
I think you landed the plane without landing on too spicy of a track.
yeah.
Okay, so
Uh,
then Will said, from a policy standpoint, maybe open source mandates so the tail risk outcomes could be flagged in real time. Um, like basically just like force these AI companies to put everything out and about. I know there's been a good amount of open sourcing for like LLM type AI. And this is something, Jeff, I don't know if you know more about. Is there a similar effort to open source kind of like these like physically instantiated AI systems? Because this does actually seem like a possible mechanism that maybe has not been pursued.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, and I think that you're where what I hear you hitting on is we need more of a technical perspective in this
Yeah.
because some of the consequences and issues of autonomy technology are baked into the technology itself, and there are probably decisions around that as well. So I don't have a clear answer on that.
Cool. And then I'm just looking through. There's lots of messages in here.
So what do you guys think? Are we way off track? Are we on track? Do you see where we're heading? Does the story resonate?
Yeah, and is there like something that we just haven't seen, right? Like I think that that's really like one of the big things that we want to get out of these bringing y'all in the conversation is obviously me and Jeff each come with our own blind spots, our own like set of experiences, and just trying to open it up to y'all to see if there's like some aspect of this conversation that just both of us are just completely blind to.
Yeah, and maybe and if you guys like the Substack lives, we can do them more regularly. Maybe
Yep.
we can do one on the Boyd Institute overall and just kind of the story that the opportunity that we're seeing is like how do we help like what's the big grand narrative that we're working on? And as I see it, like AI and boomers going away are really going to ushering in a massive transformation over the next decade or two. Everything's going to be up for grabs and we want to be adults in the room. Like, there's a lot about America that's awesome. There's a lot about it that needs to be renewed and reformed, and we want to create a space where LFG Americans can and our friends in other countries can come together and solve meaningful problems and engage in them and follow along on a quarterly basis. And so, telling that story a little bit more and engaging with you guys. One of the issues I know we're moving away from autonomy here, but what the heck? One of the things we're just talking about right now is what our next quarterly policy sprint focuses on, which strategic issue. And historically, we've done more global national security ish ones, but we want to test something a little bit more domestic because we realized a lot of domestic issues are core to are core to America's future and also materially impact the our audience. So I would say the two that are at least foremost on my mind are housing affordability, which I know there's been a lot of talk about that, especially on the center left, and then also just higher ed reform. And I know in the current administration and everything that's going on, there's a lot in higher ed reform, but we think there on both issues, we think there may be some perspectives and solutions that haven't really been surfaced. And so those are two examples of two possible sprints we're looking at. But would love your feedback and questions on any of that.
Yeah, and just to add to this, like kind of the way that we're thinking about the Boyd Institute and all of this stuff is that Jeff had mentioned in the next 10 years there's these two huge changes that are coming, right? Is that one that a lot of our institutions are staffed and controlled sounds so sinister, but basically run primarily by boomers. And then simultaneously there's this AI. And both of those changes on their own, right, would be pretty substantial, but they're kind of like coinciding. And so thinking of a way to I like to say this in many of my articles that the last 70 odd years has been a golden age for humanity, right? Like it's been outstandingly good. There's been costs, there's been problems, but overwhelmingly it's been really good for humans. And I as a Zoomer or as a Zillennial, I really want that to continue, right? Like I want the next 70 years to be as good as the previous 70, and that will require reform and radical rethinking. And either that could be done in kind of like an anarchic, chaotic, violent way, or it could be done in a more thoughtful, uh, democratic and open way. And I know which one I would emphatically prefer. But either way, reform is coming and change is coming, and we just want to try to open a space for that reform and change to be as positive and productive as possible.
Yeah, and I would add if you guys aren't subscribed to Peter's Substack, go subscribe to it. Your latest essay on the Zoom thoughts on the Zoomers was
Yeah.
fascinating. I thought it was really insightful and it was very like I think your perspective's interesting because it's both mature and honest at the same time. Like I think you kind of have the best of the Zoomer That sounds patronizing. I think you have a really interesting perspective, and I learned a lot reading that essay. I think you guys will find it valuable, so go check it out.
And
And then
you
I'm
should
work.
read Jeff's article on Zoomers because it was actually I'd listened to his and
Oh
then
yeah.
mine was written as kind of like a thought response.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So
Yeah.
yeah, about a year ago, I wrote like a letter to different generations of men, just as kind of an exercise, and I wrote a letter to Zoomer men. It was called, and I think it turned out pretty good. Like I was really worried it would just be fake or lame. But yeah, and I'm also working on an essay right now, a personal essay on thinking about transitioning to a post-boomer world. So just collecting some thoughts on that. So you guys will see that come out in a couple days. And if you're not subscribed to me, please do if you're interested. All right. Well, it's 11. I have some more time. I have like 15 more minutes if you want to stay on, Peter.
Sure.
If you have to bail, um,
I do not. I think we're starting to run out of the kind of the thing we were intended to talk about.
yeah,
The one thing I want to see is it looks like Scott left this comment that I thought was interesting, which is I think education is closely linked to automation, over education, education gaps, promoting the trades. I think that this is something I've been thinking about in terms of us giving concrete recommendations on automation because it's interesting that 10 years ago when I was getting started in college, that there was a lot of talk about automation and kind of the future even then. And I think in retrospect, the advice they gave was really bad, right? Like this is Jeff shared the article about this computer scientist who is now working at Chipotle from the New York Times. And it was fascinating because that person followed, all the advice. And in terms of education, I'm almost like hesitant to think of like, and I'm interested in Jeff on your thoughts on this. I'm almost hesitant to say like, oh, this is the right solution, like teach everyone to do trades, simply because we're operating in an environment with like extreme uncertainty, and I'm not sure. Everyone could go get trades, and then suddenly we could build the Optimus robot that is just able to do all the plumbing, and then people are fucked. So I'm interested, Jeff, if you have any thoughts on kind of like how we think about trying to educate people for this transition, given the fact that things could change dramatically in any way.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this is a policy sprint unto itself. Is how
Yeah.
is education for an AI-driven world? And I think you're right. Like anytime somebody says, "Go study computer science," like the article was talking about how the people who didn't go to college and went into the trades are getting better jobs than the people who followed the advice, took the AP classes, and studied computer science, right? So, what's up with that? So, I think you're right to be skeptical of like single bullet, like go do this, plastics. I think it's more a question of how do we prepare for an AI driven economy. So, I have an 8-year old, and so I think about that in education for Gen Alpha, my Gen Alpha child, right? And I'm obsessed with the Alpha schools. If you guys have heard of it, um, I've learned a lot. I'm friendly with the founder of it. I'm a huge fan. I haven't personally sending my school kid there yet, but I'm like watching it and studying it. And they basically use a lot of AI driven apps to for a lot of the core curriculum. And I think there's huge potential to. Oh, and the other thing they do these life skills workshops where they're building meta skills to help kids like navigate the future. And I think a lot of our education and status gains are built around yesterday's wars effectively. Like
Yeah.
we're a lot of people are fighting the last war or preparing for the last one, and that it's more useful to think about what's going to be needed next. And it's not about studying one thing or this, but it might be about building a set of skills that can help you navigate a new environment. I think creativity, critical thinking. I mean, I view AI more as a force multiplier than as something else. So I think somebody made the point like those of us who have already been educated in a pre-AI world are like much better positioned to harness it than those who have come up dependent on it. So anyway, I don't really have a clear vision of what that looks like, but I think I know what the conversation needs to be.
Yeah. And then I graduated with a college engineering degree in 2020. Definitely felt like the last plane out of Saigon. Yeah, that I resonate with that.
I
Um,
just points for that metaphor. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. Can you talk about mechanisms to get capital into non-ideological orgs? Not for profits are incentivized to be radical to generate more revenue in the business model. So I know we've got like 10 minutes left. I would actually be kind of interested in if you have any thoughts. I don't know if you want to talk about this right now, but kind of like how we keep the void from being captured by like one narrative or being basically ideologically captured in some way.
Yeah, I read this as how do you raise money and how do you get capital. I mean, I guess a lot of capital. I mean, my worldview is like we have technology is driving a lot of politics, and we have venture capital pouring money into massive technology all the time, and so that's kind of humming. But I think what Michael is pointing at is something different. Like, how do we get more donations into organizations like the Boyd Institute that are actually trying to engage in problem solving in a deeper way? I don't know is the answer. I mean, we're gonna find out. I do believe that when you have a good business model and a good story, that there are billionaires and donors out there who will want to buy into that vision. Right now, I would describe what we're doing as a laboratory. And it's taken a couple years to just even, we've had a sandbox that we've played in, haven't taken it seriously like a business. But I think especially with Peter's collaboration, we're starting to really sharpen that. And I think we'll be able to explore, hey, do we want to build this up? Do we want to go raise more money for this effort that we're doing and learn a lot and learn more about what that balance is? I mean, it's easy to look at billionaire landscape, especially if you're center right, and be like, oh, they just want to fund these culture war things, or they're stingy or whatever. And I don't know that that's actually true. I know it feels like that for some people. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I don't have a clear answer, Michael.
That sounds good. We've been chatting for a little bit over an hour. I don't
Yeah.
know if there's any last things you want to touch on before we wrap up, but I really appreciate we had like 50 people show up, which is more than I was personally expecting. And it's I'm seeing many of the names that I interact with on Substack every day, so it's lovely to see you all.
Yeah, agreed. And Peter, you mentioned this is your first live, and
It
great
is, yeah.
job. You're a
Thank you.
natural. I thought it was a fantastic conversation. And I guess Peter, like, where do we go from here in terms of our essay?
I almost feel like the best mechanism, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it, are that maybe we should both sit down and write, or maybe at least I'll sit down and write an article in my own voice that I think has what I see as like the big problems and why this is important, and just restart and kind of try to build it out as like a more coherent argument. I'm interested if you have a
Yeah,
different perspective.
if you want to go for it, yeah, feel free. I think where I'm at is rather than rushing to publish it like tomorrow, let's give ourselves some breathing room and to think through. And if you want to take a shot at it, all I care about is that it's a sound argument and that we're being measured
Yeah,
and addressing counter arguments effectively. Um, but yeah, if you want to take a shot at the draft and kind of from a blank canvas, I think it's a great idea.
it's cool.
So,
It's cool.
all right, you feeling good?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. Yeah,
Okay, awesome. Thank you all for listening. This has been a great conversation. Peter, thanks for your time too.
yeah, of
Appreciate it.
course. See ya.
Okay,
Bye.
talk to you later.